After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the significance of human rights, the safeguards at national and international level, the legal standpoint of human rights and protection from atrocities, as well as the guidelines from the National Human Rights Commission of India in cases of custodial death. To introduce you the topic, I will begin with the quote from our father of nation, Mahatma Gandhi ji. He said, "You can chain me, you can torture me, you can even destroy this body, but you will never imprison my mind." The very name human rights signifies the basic power and privilege that naturally belongs to an individual just by the virtue of being human. Human right is a form of natural rights which are considered beyond the authority of any ruler, government or international body to dismiss, and not dependent upon the laws, customs or beliefs of any particular culture or government. These are indeed universal and inalienable, which usually include but not limited to right to life and liberty, freedom of thought and expression, and equality before the law irrespective of nationality, race, religion, sex or any other discriminatory factors. Even though the concept is not new, it came into wider use after the World War II. This was natural as the world was coming to terms to the unprecedented, unpardonable, ghastly atrocities committed by the Japanese and the Nazi Germans, which aptly can be described as the crime against humanity. And that's why the first solid step, first bold step was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 under the aegis of newly formed United Nations at that time, and that was perhaps the turning point in the history of humanity, as this is the one which recognized and defined human rights in its various contours on a global scale, and since has been elaborated in the subsequent international treaties, regional human rights declaration, national constitutions and laws. This was closely followed by the Geneva Convention, which extensively defined basic wartime rights of prisoners, of civilians as well as that of the military personnel, and established protocol for the protection for the wounded and the protections for civilians in and around war zones. Thus, this was the beginning of protracted and concerted efforts by the governments around the world to establish human rights as an inalienable aspect of modern governance. Coming on to the India. India, as we know, is the largest democracy in the world, and time and again we can see public demonstrations and the political rallies which are used as tools to register their grievances. Section 44 of the Criminal Procedure Code, this empowers a magistrate to prohibit an assembly of more than 5 persons in an area. Many times law enforcement officials are forced to use physical force in order to maintain law and order. While officers try to disperse unlawful assembly, they are used to use physical force. This might range from using non-lethal tactics like baton or lathis, the water cannons, the lacrimatory agents, what we called as tear gas, to deadly tactics like use of firearms. The time and again we come across fatalities which will create lot of debate among the media, the human rights associations and the civil society regarding disproportionate use of force in order to accomplish that task. The common cause of deaths include in such situation being blunt trauma to the body by use of police batons. Constabularies, they also practice neck hold maneuvers as a means of subduing suspects, resisting arrest or to control prisoners who are combative and unmanageable. Coming on to the legal issues, how this concept of human rights evolved in our country. Honorable Supreme Court of India, in a judgment in the case of D.K. Basu versus the state of Bengals, they have reiterated it. It was clear that the precious right which guarantees human rights to every citizen guaranteed by the Constitution cannot be denied to even convicts under trials, detainees and other prisoners in the custody except according to the procedure established by law by placing such reasonable restrictions which are permitted by law. Article 25 of the Constitution defines any form of torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment would fall the breach of this article, whether it occurs during investigation, interrogation or otherwise. Thus, torture is considered direct violation of the fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution and also the breach of Article 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The custodial torture by the law enforcement agencies is a serious issue, as the government agencies and personals with the sacred duty of upholding the laws of the land, they indulge in this gruesome abuse of their power, which is a serious aberration on the state. Now coming on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, what is their role? This UDHR, in short I will call as, this had a wider role to safeguard various aspects of human rights in general and torture specifically. International treaties were passed with the passage of time, the most important being United Nations Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment in the year 1984. Some of the salient features of this I will tell in brief. Each state party shall take effective legislative, administrative, judicial or other measures to prevent any acts of torture in any territory under its jurisdiction. No exceptional circumstances whatsoever, whether a state of war or a threat of war, internal political instability or any other public emergency may be invoked as a justification of torture. An order from a superior officer or a public authority may not be invoked as a justification of torture. And no state party shall expel or return or extradite a person to another state where there are substantial grounds for believing that he would be in danger of being subjected to torture. Interestingly, India, even though it has signed the treaty but has not ratified the same till date. Coming on to the statutory safeguards, there are two approaches with respect to the remedies provided for against custodial torture and subsequent death as well. These two approaches are legal regime and judicial precedents. The constitutional safeguards that we will discuss, I will discuss first. It has been held in so many judgments that just because a person is in police custody or detained or under arrest does not deprive him of his basic fundamental rights, and its violation empowers the person to move this Supreme Court under Article 20 of the Constitution of India, under Article 21 and so forth. I will take one by one. Article 20 of the Constitution of India, which primarily gives a person the rights against conviction of offences. It also protects against double jeopardy, that is, nemo det pro eadem causa bis vexare. This article, most importantly, protects a person from self-incrimination. The police subject a person to brutal and continuous torture to make him confess to a crime even if he has not committed the same. So this article takes care of that. Nobody can be subjected against his own. Then Article 21 of the Constitution of India. It has been understood that to protect the right to be free from torture, the expression, life or personal liberty, this includes a guarantee against torture and assault even by the state and its functionaries to a person who is taken into custody and no sovereign immunity can be pleaded against the liability of the state arising due to such criminal use of force over the captive person. Then Article 22 of the Constitution of India. These provides 4 basic fundamental rights with respect to conviction. These include being informed of the grounds of arrest, to be defended by a legal practitioner of his choice, preventive detention laws, and production before the nearest magistrate within 24 hours of arrest of the person. Thus, all these 4 provisions are designed to ensure that a person is not subjected to any ill treatment that is devoid of statutory backing or surpasses prescribed excesses. Then Article 32 of Constitution of India. Detention does not deprive one of his fundamental rights. They don't flee the persons as he enters the prison, although they may suffer shrinkage necessitated by incarceration. However, the extent of shrinkage can and should never reach the stage of torture in custody of such a nature that the person are reduced to a mere animal existence. Then, other than the constitutional safeguard, there are other legal safeguards as well, like Indian Evidence Act. A confession to a police officer cannot be proved as against a person accused of any offence as defined under Section 25 of the Indian Evidence Act, and confession caused by threats from a person in authority in order to avoid any evil of a temporal nature would be irrelevant in criminal proceedings as inter alia provided in Section 24. Thus, even though custodial torture is not expressly prohibited by law in India, the evidence collected by illegal means, including torture, is not accepted in the court of law. Then there is a Code of Criminal Procedure. Section 46 and 49 of this code, these protect those under custody from the torture who are not accused of an offence punishable with death or imprisonment for life and also during escape. Section 50 to 56 are in consonance with the Article 22 of the Constitution. Section 44 of the code is a provision that to a significant extent corresponds to any infliction of custodial torture and violence. According to it, when an allegation of ill treatment is made by a person in custody, the magistrate is then and there required to examine his body and shall place on record the result of his examination and reasons therefor. Another significant provision with respect to custodial torture leading to deaths is Section 176 of the code, where a compulsory magisterial inquiry is to take place on death of an accused caused in police custody, in place of 174 CRPC, which is normally prevalent in India in all cases of deaths, unnatural suspicious deaths. Section 167 and 309 of the Criminal Procedure Code, they have the object of bringing the accused persons before the court and so safeguard their rights and interest as the detention is under their authorization. Then there is Indian Police Act. Section 7 and 29 of this act, they provide for dismissal, penalty or suspension of the police officers who are negligent in the discharge of their duties or unfit to perform the same. This can be seen in the light of the police officers violating various constitutional and statutory safeguards along with the guidelines prescribed. Then there is Indian Penal Code. After the very controversial Mathura rape case, an amendment was brought in Section 376 of the IPC. Section 376 1B penalizes custodial rape committed by the police officers. This was a welcome change made to the section in this section, as it finally condemns the act of police officers who take advantage of their authority. Section 330, 331, 342 and 348 of the IPC, they have ostensibly been designed to deter a police officer who is empowered to arrest a person and to interrogate him during investigation of an offence from resorting to third degree methods causing torture. Of course, after the recent amendment of the Criminal Amendment Act 2013, what happens after the Nirbhaya rape episode, now these guidelines, or you can say these acts, these laws have been made further stringent. Then there are additional safeguards also. As per the 177th Law Commission report, it requires amendments that should be brought in the CRPC while making is the duty of the police officer in whose custody they are arrested persons, that they should ensure their safety and holding them responsible for failure of the same. 30 years hence, this amendment has still not been incorporated. The presence of an advocate during interrogation of the arrested person is also a recommendation that has been made. Despite the above, the abominable figures regarding custodial torture have still not been improved. One very simple reason behind this could be that the persons who are supposed to protect people are themselves the wrongdoers. The criminal justice system in India is supposed to use the reformist approach. However, approach is such that the animals get better treatment. The very idea of a human being in custody save for the protection and nurturing is an anathema to the human existence. The word custody implies guardianship and protective care. So even when applied to indicate arrest or incarceration, it does not carry any sinister symptoms of violence during custody. In a complaint of custodial torture, the court should not adopt a casual approach to it on the ground that it has been made by a habitual offender. Such a system obviously warrants appropriate control over the police in order to discourage them from exercise their power in a capricious manner. Similarly, an effective institutional grievance redressal mechanism to vindicate police excesses is also the need of the hour. As held by the Honorable Supreme Court, custodial torture is a naked violation of human dignity and degradation which destroys to a very large extent the human personality. India has progressed a lot, and as the formation of National Human Rights Commission was there, the Republic of India, keeping in the letter and spirit of its commitment to the people of India and international community, they passed the benchmark legislation, the Protection of Human Rights Acts 1993, and this has been amended so many times in the wake of recent developments. This act was passed for the formation of National Human Rights Commission as well as State Human Rights Commission for the better protection of human rights and all matters connected with it. Thus, in India, it is the NHRC in short, that is the National Human Rights Commission, NHRC. This is a premier autonomous institution which has defined human rights as rights relating to the life, liberty, equality and dignity of the individuals is guaranteed by the Constitution or embodied in the national covenants. The NHRC have framed certain guidelines on custodial death investigation, and they have been modified over the years several times. Recently, even in 2014 also they have modified the guidelines. As per these guidelines, in case of custodial death, a magisterial inquest must be carried out under section 176 on all cases of custodial deaths. This is in contrast to the normal police inquest which is being held under 174 CRPC. Then in the year 2005, it has further clarified that only in cases of suspected unnatural deaths, judicial magistrate should investigate, and in others, executive magistrate shall conduct the inquest. This was essential because it was soon realized that majority of the custodial deaths were due to natural causes like the tuberculosis, old age and other natural causes. So basically it was you can say the mere wastage of the precious judicial time. So they have modified it later in 2005. A model autopsy pro forma was formulated based upon the Minnesota Protocol, and it was advised to conduct the post-mortem examination as per this protocol. They further advised that the post-mortem examination should be conducted by a board of doctors instead of a single doctor, and one of them preferably should be a forensic medicine expert who will be well versed with the subject and in a better position to interpret whatever those physical findings are there. Video recording of the whole process of autopsy procedure is mandatory as per the NHRC guidelines. Further, in the year 2010, it was clarified that the responsibility of arranging it lies with the district magistrate and not with the physician, as earlier it was not clarified that who will arrange the videography, whether it is the doctor, whether it is the police, or it is the magistrate. So in 2010 they have clarified that it is the duty of the district magistrate to arrange for the videography and the responsibility lies only with him. While performing the autopsy, one must take special precautions and every attempt must be made to unearth deep-seated contusion, especially in the back of the body, including the gluteal regions, because these are the areas where one finds the marks of the custodial torture. And an incision should be made both in palms as well as soles to look for any deep-seated collection of blood, because these are areas which are likely to be missed during a cursory physical examination. Coming on to the role of a medical professional in this whole gamut of custodial torture and custodial death. There are many ways in which physician can be complicit. He can be directly involved in overviewing the torture by monitoring the vital parameters of the victim. Sometimes by using the medical knowledge, he can innovate gruesome yet relatively safe ways to torture. More commonly, they may help the torturers by declaring the victims physically fit for the torture. They can also help cover up the crime by issuing false certificate, purposefully ignoring vital signs of torture. The fundamental idea behind the medical ethics as enumerated in the Hippocratic Oath is the maxim that says primum non nocere, which translates to first do no harm. That is the primary duty of a physician. First do no harm. And non-maleficence, which is derived from the maxim, is one of the principal laws of the medical ethics that all physicians are bound to. Thus, it is against the elementary part of medical ethics to be either by act of omission or commission to get involved in the torture process. Health professionals have unimpeachable role in fight against human rights abuse. So by simple documentation of suspected or confirmed torture, this can be a part of a critical prevention and accountability measures. It is further obvious that without sound documentation of the injuries suspected to have been caused due to torture, any serious investigation at a later stage will be compromised. So a physician, as per the declaration of Tokyo, he is not part and party to that. The World Medical Association, in its Tokyo Declaration in year 1975, they defined torture as the deliberate, systematic or wanton infliction of physical or mental suffering by one or more persons acting alone or on the orders of any authority to force another person to yield information, to make a confession, or for any other reason. Torture has been practiced throughout the recorded history. The ancient Indians, Romans, Jews, Egyptians and many other cultures in history, they included torture as an integral part of their justice system. The broadly use of torture was justified for solving crimes as a tool of interrogation, to maintain social control, to defend the ruling state from internal and external threats, to force confessions, for ethnic cleansing or for extortion, etc. Custodial deaths occur in the custody or control of the party, not just limited to interrogation room, lockup or prison. It may be executed in unofficial secret locations. So we have to understand that. State actors like police, prison staff, military officers, including their intelligence wing, and non-state actors like criminal syndicates, Maoists, terrorists, militias, and all insurgents, they all could be the perpetrators. So at times, role of health professionals being passively involved cannot be ruled out, although that the cases are sporadic and the World Declaration of Tokyo prohibits that. The National Human Rights Commission of India has prepared specific guidelines to deal with all custodial torture and death cases. The role of medical professional in documentation of various injuries in a specified manner is a first and foremost and very important role. And we must understand that as the process is going on, the guidelines are being revised every second or third year depending upon whatever cases comes to the knowledge, whatever issues comes to the knowledge, and that's why the National Human Rights Commission of India, they are doing a very good role in improving the system of human rights violation cases in India.